His picture's on page 1 of newspapers. His name is all over TV.
He was Moby Dick in the organized crime world.
John Gotti wasn't born rich, powerful, or connected. By his 40s, he ruled New York as the Teflon Don, a gangster who smiled for cameras, flaunted his wealth, and beat the system. His flashy rise pulled back the curtain on organized crime, showing the world the brutal secret life of the mob. Notorious, unforgettable, and feared, let's dive into the ruthless world of John Gotti. Born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx, John Joseph Gotti was the 5th of 13 children in a poor Italian-American family. His father, John Sr., was a construction worker who never made enough to feed the family, and little John grew up hating the feeling of being broke. He wanted more money, respect, and power, and in New York's tough neighborhoods, there was only one group of people who seemed to have all three: the Mafia. By age 12, Gotti was already running errands for gangsters. He hung around local clubs, did small-time hustles, and idolized the men who drove Cadillacs and wore sharp suits. School? He dropped out at 16. Crime paid better. He started with petty thefts and truck hijackings around Idlewild Airport, now JFK. He and his friends, the Fulton Rockaway Boys, stole cargo and split profits with local mobsters. It didn't take long for Gotti to get noticed by Carmine Fatico, a captain in the Gambino crime family. Fatico saw potential as a street-smart kid with guts, ambition, and no fear of authority. He brought Gotti into his crew at the Bergin Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, a little corner of Queens that would one day become Gotti's headquarters. But Gotti's rise wasn't clean.
Making your bones means you've proved your tutorship and that you are now ready for full-fledged membership as a maid or soldier in the family.
He spent 3 years in prison in the late 1960s for hijacking trucks. When he got out, he came back tougher and more loyal to the mob than ever. His big break came in 1973 when Gambino boss Carlo Gambino ordered revenge on James McBratney, the man who had kidnapped and murdered his nephew. Gotti helped plan and carry out the hit. It was messy, public, and landed him in prison again, but it also earned him the Mafia's trust. When he got out in 1977, he was made acting captain while his mentor, Carmine Fatico, faced legal trouble. Around this time, Gotti was living what looked like a normal suburban life, married to Victoria DiGiorgio, raising 5 kids in Howard Beach, Queens. But behind the quiet front, he was rising fast through the Gambino ranks. His real mentor now was Agnello Neil Della Croce, the family's underboss, a man who believed in old-school loyalty and respect. Della Croce taught Gotti the Mafia's sacred code: silence, obedience, and keeping a low profile. Gotti followed 2 of those rules. Silence? Yes. Obedience? Mostly. But a low profile? Never. When Carlo Gambino died, the leadership passed to Paul Castellano, a boss who ran things more like a corporation than a street operation. He focused on white-collar crimes, construction, unions, and business rackets, and banned drug dealing entirely. That made him rich, but it alienated the soldiers on the street who wanted action. Guys like Gotti felt left out, treated like second-class criminals while Castellano lived in a mansion. Things got worse when Gotti's son, Frank, was accidentally killed by a neighbor in a dirt bike accident in 1980. The man responsible disappeared soon after, never to be seen again. Police suspected revenge, but no one could prove it. By the mid-1980s, the Gambino family was divided. When Della Croce died of cancer in December 1985, the last thread holding peace together snapped. 2 weeks later, on December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano and his driver were gunned down outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. It was one of the boldest murders in mob history, and though no one ever said it out loud, everyone knew. John Gotti had ordered it. Within days, he took control of the Gambino family, the most powerful mafia family in the country. This was the birth of the Dapper Don. Gotti was nothing like his predecessors. He didn't hide in shadows or whisper in smoky backrooms. He strutted through courtrooms in $1,000 suits, his hair perfectly slicked back, his chin high. The media loved him. He was photogenic, charismatic, quotable. When reporters called him the Dapper Don, he leaned into it. But what made him famous made him dangerous not to his enemies, but to himself. Between 1986 and 1989, Gotti faced trial after trial assault, racketeering, conspiracy, and walked free every time. Jurors were bribed, witnesses vanished, and prosecutors were humiliated. Newspapers dubbed him the Teflon Don because nothing stuck. To the public, he became an anti-hero, the outlaw who beat the system. To law enforcement, he was public enemy number one. But while Gotti basked in the spotlight, the FBI was watching and listening. Undercover agents bugged his Ravenite social club, his cars, and even the apartment above the club where he met his top men. Over the years, they collected hours of recordings of Gotti discussing murders, business, and even mocking his own associates. His biggest mistake wasn't talking, it was talking too much. Inside the family, his underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano, was growing restless. Gravano had been loyal, running operations and managing hits, but when the FBI played him recordings of Gotti blaming him for multiple murders, Gravano flipped. He became one of the highest-ranking mobsters ever to turn government witness. In 1992, John Gotti went on trial for 5 murders, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. The case was airtight. Gravano's testimony, combined with hours of taped conversations, left no room for escape. After a 7-week trial, the verdict came in, guilty on all counts. The man who once smiled outside every courthouse now stood silent. The Teflon Don had finally cracked. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and shipped to the high-security federal penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. His reign, the flashiest, boldest, and most public in mafia history, was over. But Gotti wasn't done trying to control his empire. From his cell, he passed messages through his lawyers and visitors, attempting to run the Gambino family through his son, John Gotti Jr. But the FBI's constant surveillance made that nearly impossible. Within a few years, his once mighty organization was fractured, and the Gotti name, once feared, became a target for prosecutors. Meanwhile, the FBI was rewriting its playbook. The RICO Act, which allowed prosecutors to charge entire criminal organizations instead of individuals, became their main weapon. Gotti's downfall showed them how to dismantle the mafia from the top down. His fame had drawn attention, not just to him, but to the entire mob structure. The mafia could no longer hide behind silence. By the mid-1990s, the mob world had changed. Wiretaps, informants, and RICO cases wiped out the old power. Gotti's arrogance, his need for fame, had cracked open the code of secrecy that had protected the mafia for decades. In 2002, after a decade behind bars, John Gotti died of throat cancer in a federal prison hospital in Missouri. He was 61. Even then, his funeral drew crowds to the streets of Queens. People still fascinated by the man who had once been untouchable. But his empire didn't survive him. His son tried to lead, but the FBI pressure never let up. By the 2000s, the Gambino family had splintered, and organized crime in New York was a shadow of what it had been under Gotti's reign. Still, his legacy refuses to fade. Some people see him as the last great gangster, the man who brought style, swagger, and fear back to the mafia. Others say he was the one who destroyed it, who turned a secret brotherhood into a spectacle. Maybe both are true. John Gotti's story is the ultimate American contradiction. A man who rose from nothing, built an empire through fear and loyalty, and lost it all because he couldn't resist fame. He craved respect but demanded attention. He wanted to be the king of the underworld and the star of the evening news, and he became both, at least for a while. But in the end, it cost him everything: his power, his freedom, and his legacy. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, wanted the world to know his name, to see the swagger, the charm, the unstoppable rise of a man who bent the rules and the law alike. He achieved fame that few in the mob ever dreamed of, yet that same spotlight would become his downfall. Now, his name is immortalized, whispered in fear and fascination alike. The question lingers: did Gotti cement the mob's legend, or did he expose it so fully that its empire could never recover? And that's the story: the rise, the power, and the ultimate fall of John Gotti. From the streets of the Bronx to the headlines of every newspaper, he lived larger than life, played the game on his terms, and paid the price in the end. If you found this story as wild and fascinating as it was, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with which part shocked you the most, and let us know who you want us to cover next.